They called us weak, unworthy, a dust mote in the grand, terrifying machinery of the cosmos. Our existence was a statistical anomaly, a fleeting flicker of organic light on a world that, by all quantifiable metrics, should have already been sterilized by a nearby supernova or simply eaten by its own, self-made poisons. The galactic community, a coalition of 212 species spanning 3 spiral arms, had long ago established an unspoken, cardinal rule, etched not in stone but in the collective memory of 1,000 quiet extinctions. Never take a primitive species too seriously. To do so was to invite distraction, to waste precious cycles of energy and attention that could be better spent on internal politics or, more critically, avoiding the true, unspeakable horrors that lay between the stars. Humanity was the living embodiment of this rule's wisdom. We had finally reached the stars. Not with a unified, majestic leap, but with a series of frantic, sputtering hops fueled by cobbled-together fusion drives and a desperate, almost pathetic optimism. When our first, fully functional deep space vessel, the Tereshkova's Hope, finally limped into a shared galactic space lane, a monumental achievement for us, there was no war, no welcome. Only laughter. The dominant power in this corner of the Orion Arm was the Zari Empire. Their reign was not one of benign governance but of pure, unchallenged metallurgical superiority. The Zari were creatures of cool, disciplined intellect, their minds structured like their starships, vast, silent, and overwhelmingly functional. Their ships were works of artful, terrifying geometry, hulls seamlessly woven from neutronium alloys, their primary weapons, phased annihilation cannons, capable of reducing a planet's crust to glowing slag in a single salvo. Their collective memory was so long that 1,000 human lifespans would barely cover a minor footnote in their history. To the Zari, and by extension the Council, humanity was an insult to the concept of sapience. The inaugural human diplomatic mission, led by the beleaguered ambassador Evelyn Reed, stood before the United Galactic Council in the orbital station known as the Earthal Hub. The hall was a vast, glittering hemisphere of polished obsidian and crystallized light, filled with delegates whose forms ranged from crystalline shards that sang with magnetic energy to immense, silent quadrupeds draped in imperial silks. Ambassador Reed, in a simple grey suit that looked tragically thin next to the armored exoskeletons and chitinous plates of her peers, offered a nervous, earnest greeting. It was met with a chorus of muted, vibrating amusement. The Terrans, declared Councillor Takarth of the Krill Dominion, an arachnoid being whose voice was a high-pitched, mocking rasp, have presented their flagship. It appears to be constructed of refined scrap metal and historical sentiment. Our ships? Outdated. They were fragile shells, their reactors running at a fraction of Zari efficiency. The Tereshkova's Hope was affectionately, or derisively, nicknamed the Tin Can, across the local comms nets. Our weapons? Laughable. Kinetic slugs and early-stage lasers. The Zari had a term for our armaments: toy fire. Our existence? A footnote. The Zari intelligence report filed on the Terran species was a single, dismissive paragraph that concluded, highly emotional. Primitive reliance on combustion and chemical reaction. Low systemic unity. Not a threat. File under, ecological preservation only. For 3 cycles, humanity endured this cold, calculated dismissal. We begged for minor trade treaties, for access to shielded power conduits, for the most basic galactic navigation charts. We were given scraps, the cosmic equivalent of tourists being allowed to browse the gift shop but never enter the palace. And then, the Zari made a decision that would haunt them forever. A casual, arrogant choice made during a slow week in the High Command's operations schedule. They attacked Earth. It wasn't for resources. Our metals were too common, our rare earth deposits too shallow. It wasn't out of need. The Zari Empire was self-sufficient, their fleets running on captured black hole energy. They attacked for sport. Admiral Valaris, the commander who authorized the strike, later explained in his internal logs that would eventually be read back to him, word for word, in the deepest silence of space, that the attack was intended as a systemic cleansing drill. A brief, spectacular demonstration of Zari power to intimidate a few troublesome fringe colonies, and an opportunity for their fresh batch of officers to get live combat experience against targets that wouldn't shoot back. 30 warships were dispatched. 30 vessels of seamless, black neutronium, each one capable of reducing a moon to ash. The United Galactic Council barely noticed. A minor blip on the deep scan monitors, quickly filtered out as Zari internal policing. Why would they? The arithmetic was simple. Zari technological might divided by human technological frailty equaled 0 chance for the Terrans. They predicted a swift humiliation. A 10-hour war, followed by a week of orbital cleanup. They were right about one thing. It was humiliating. But not for us. The invasion began at 040 hours GMT, a time chosen by Admiral Valaris's tactical AI for maximum psychological impact on the planet's 2 largest population centers. The first act was not an outright orbital bombardment, but a devastating series of precise kinetic strikes on key defensive and communications relays. The intention was to blind the target, not destroy it. Fire rained from the skies. Not elegant plasma, but chunks of focused, superheated metal that moved with the speed of light. The global communications grid was severed in under 6 minutes. Cities burned as military bases and strategic command centers were vaporized. Orbital stations, our fragile picket line in the void, fell in a series of agonizing, silent explosions that were barely a flicker on the Zari tactical displays. The world teetered on the edge. The initial shock was absolute. Panic, the Zari expected, would be the primary response. Mass hysteria. Immediate governmental collapse. They had pre-written the surrender document, translated into 300 of Earth's major languages. Yet, we did not surrender. In the ruins of what was once a unified command, humanity did not beg. We adapted. The Zari had seen countless civilizations fold. The pattern was always the same. A brief, futile defense, followed by a negotiated surrender where the losing side gave up all autonomy in exchange for the lives of its citizens. They expected terror, submission, collapse. Instead, they found something else. In less than 24 hours, the Zari tactical models became useless. Humanity didn't just fight, it transformed. The decentralized nature of our society, the very thing the Zari intelligence report had marked as a weakness, low systemic unity, became our most potent defense. There was no single capital to capture, no central authority whose destruction would end the war. The fight was instantaneously global, but intensely local. In the crumbling megacities, the subway systems and utility tunnels became the arteries of underground resistance cells. Nations that had been on the brink of war with one another just months prior instantly united, their previous grievances evaporating in the white-hot light of a shared, existential threat. The Zari expected to fight soldiers. Instead, they found that everyone was a combatant. Doctors used their precise anatomical knowledge to craft better pressure point explosives. Engineers jury-rigged automated defense turrets out of construction equipment. Even farmers, familiar with the terrain and armed with hunting rifles, became the silent ghosts of the cornfields and arid plains. We turned the war into a grind. 1,000,000 tiny, razor-sharp cuts instead of one clean incision. Zari ground troops, elite, 7-foot-tall warriors encased in dark, humming armor, landed expecting a policing action, a slow occupation. What they got was hell. The cities they had half destroyed became kill zones. Every shattered window was a sniper nest. Every pile of rebar and concrete rubble was a defensive barrier or a cunningly placed trap. Sergeant Khalith, a veteran of 3 systemic cleansings, wrote in his datapad log on the 3rd day, "The primitives do not follow combat protocols. They do not retreat when their flanks are exposed. They do not request extraction when wounded. They simply keep firing. We have taken more casualties in 3 days on this primitive world than in the Krill uprising of '09. Our logistics predict mission success. My gut predicts an early retirement in a body bag." The nights were the worst. Zari thermal and sonic detection was useless against the guerrilla tactics of a species that had evolved to hunt and survive in every ecological niche. Every night, soldiers disappeared. Not killed in open battle, not destroyed in the spectacular conflagrations of phased annihilation fire. They vanished. One Zari patrol detail, guarding a critical downed communications hub outside what was once called Rio de Janeiro, went silent. A response team found the scene too clean. No explosions, no spent energy cells. Just a small, circular scorch mark where a transport beacon had been, and on the nearest structural wall, a chilling addition. Then came the messages. Bloodied Zari corpses were found, not discarded, but displayed. Ritualistically. Their own alien blood, a viscous, phosphorescent blue, smeared into crude, Terran words across the walls of the temporary barracks and commandeered municipal centers. We are coming. You should have stayed in the stars. Run. For the first time in centuries, the Zari felt genuine, visceral fear. The cold, calculated dread of a superior force realizing that the enemy is not fighting to win, but fighting to survive. And a survival fight has no rules, no limits, and no surrender. By the end of the first week, Admiral Valaris's internal report to Zari Prime was a masterpiece of professional panic. This is no war. This is a nightmare. Their resistance is non-linear. They are utilizing our own logistical weaknesses against us. Our ground forces are being bled dry by a species that understands its own planet better than we understand our ships. Requesting immediate tactical review and potential withdrawal. And it had only begun. The adaptation accelerated with a ferocity that stunned the Zari analysts. We cracked their encrypted comms. Not with superior hardware, but with a swarm of human hackers who used the Zari's own, massive complexity against them, exploiting a single, tiny, neglected backdoor in the Empire's 200-year-old protocol stack. We rerouted their supply drops. A critical cache of anti-personnel ordnance, meant for a Zari garrison in the Eurasian mountains, landed instead on an active lava field in the Pacific Ring, its coordinates subtly altered by a technician working out of a bunker in New Delhi. Most critically, we hijacked their war machines. A human engineering team, led by a former automotive designer and an AI programming prodigy, developed a crude, logic bomb virus that could take command of a disabled Zari armored vehicle. They didn't just neutralize the threat, they repurposed it. Within 48 hours, captured Zari APCs and scout walkers, painted with rough, defiant human symbols, were being driven by human crews, turning their own technology against their own troops. By the second week, we weren't just resisting, we were winning. The Zari ground invasion was effectively stalled, then slowly, agonizingly, being pushed back to its initial landing zones. The most shocking development, however, was occurring in the void above Earth, a place the Zari considered their unassailable sanctuary. Captured Zari ships became hybrid warcraft. The first one, a disabled corvette found drifting after a heavy artillery strike, was towed to an orbital dry dock that was mostly a skeleton of steel and repurposed industrial cranes. The human engineers, who had spent a generation studying Zari schematics in the vain hope of peacetime technology transfer, now had their lab. They ripped out the sophisticated but overly complex Zari core systems and replaced them with human equivalents. Simple, redundant, and built with parts that could be sourced from 100 different terrestrial factories. The resulting vessels were crude. Ugly. They were welded masses of mismatched metal, a Zari engine here, a human life support system there, all wrapped around the terrifying punch of a jury-rigged Zari phased annihilation cannon. They were terrifyingly effective. Their lack of standardized parts made them impossible for Zari sensors to classify or target with automated systems. They were ghost ships, confusing the hyper-precise Zari fire control computers. Every approach to Earth became a death trap. The Zari fleets had established predictable patrol patterns based on centuries of uncontested dominance. Humanity didn't try to beat the Zari in a fair fight. They used their own rigidity against them. The Zari had set out to break humanity's spirit. Instead, they had forged a predator. The Zari High Command, faced with the catastrophic failure of the ground campaign and the loss of nearly 40% of their initial fleet, ordered the final, absolute solution, an extermination protocol. Total orbital cleansing. They would scorch the surface to glass, eliminate the problem, and sort through the ashes later. Admiral Valaris was given the order to power weapons for the final, planet-killing barrage. His fleet, now bristling with every available energy conduit rerouted to their primary cannons, began the terrifying whine of a civilization-ending weapon charging. But as their fleet powered weapons, a human transmission hijacked their main tactical screens. It bypassed every Zari firewall, every encryption layer, not with brute force, but with a single, elegant piece of code that the Zari, in their arrogance, had never thought to patch, a ghost in the machine. The image that filled the bridge of the flagship, the Invictus, was simple and devastating. A human soldier. He was young, his face smeared with soot and a faint streak of phosphorescent blue Zari blood. He stood calm, his eyes hard, over a bound and terrified Zari officer. His voice, translated with unnerving precision, cut through the tension. "You think you can bomb us into submission? Go ahead. Burn our cities. Destroy our world. See what happens next." The feed changed. It showed the assembled human Zari hybrid fleet. They were not polished warships, but cobbled together hunks of lethal junk. They were armed, ready, and utterly silent. In the view screen, human soldiers were seen, a terrifying mix of defiance and grim amusement on their faces. They were smiling. "You think we're trapped? You think we're afraid to die? We were waiting for you to make a mistake." The human soldier pointed a hand phaser at the screen. A single, sharp blast. Then, in the three-dimensional tactical holotank on the Invictus's bridge, a section of their own fleet exploded. Two Zari escort ships, positioned near the planet, instantly detonated, their shields collapsing not from external fire, but from a calculated internal overload. Saboteurs, human agents who had been allowed to surrender in the initial hours of the invasion, had chosen their moment. For the first time in history, humanity entered space combat on their own terms. The hybrid warships, part human, part Zari, were a chaotic force of nature. Their power management was simple and focused. Their pilot crews were veterans of aerial and atmospheric dogfights, a skill the Zari had long since abandoned for automated targeting. They were faster, deadlier, unpredictable. The once invincible Zari fleet found itself hunted. The battle that followed was not a glorious clash of capital ships, but a series of brutal, close-quarters ambushes. The hybrids used the gravitational pull of Earth's moon as cover. They cloaked in the shadow of asteroid debris. They waited in the silent, broken shells of their own fallen orbital stations. One by one, the Zari ships fell. Not with majestic explosions, but with a terrifying silence as their power cores were surgically breached. Ambush. Sabotage. Relentless pursuit. The psychological toll was immense. Zari crews, trained to fight in the open and against inferior technology, had no doctrine for this kind of enemy. They began to see the hybrids as spectral horrors, ships that shouldn't fly, crewed by creatures that should have already died. A final, coordinated strike by the hybrids shattered the Invictus's communications mast. As the flagship listed, burning, a single broadcast echoed across their fractured comms network, no longer an intercepted message, but a clear, direct challenge from the void. "You should have left us alone." The Zari fleet broke. Not in an organized retreat. That would have been professional. They fled in panic. They scattered like a flock of startled starlings, forgetting formation, forgetting protocol, each captain only caring about reaching jump space. For centuries, the Zari were the predators of this sector. But now they realized. They had kicked a hornet's nest, and the swarm was following them home. The initial engagement tally was stark, a chilling bulletin that flashed across the Earthal hub's secondary monitors, causing the Krill delegate to spontaneously retract 3 of its legs in shock. 62% of their invasion fleet, destroyed. 81% of ground forces, lost, either captured or wiped out. 100% of their objectives, failed. And the nightmare wasn't over. The High Chancellor of the Zari Empire, a being of ancient, brittle pride named Zayala, could not accept the humiliation. The very idea of the Terrans, the dust motes, turning the tables was a threat to the entire structure of Zari dominance. A second invasion fleet was assembled. It was bigger, twice the size. Every available warship, every high-ranking commander. They would erase us. That was the plan. They would arrive with a single objective, to sterilize the Terran system entirely. The fleet assembled in the remote, unpatrolled void of the Kepler Gap, a vast, silent armada of 80 warships, ready to jump to the Terran system. But when they arrived at the designated coordinates, there was a profound, unnatural silence. No human comms. No orbital defenses. No defiant broadcast. Then, the Zari systems began to fail. First, non-critical telemetry. Then, navigation. Then, comms cut. The flagship, the Retribution, was completely blind, deaf, and alone in the blackness. And then, the impossible. Their own ships, their pristine, magnificent, neutronium-hulled vessels, began firing on each other. This was the final, terrifying evolution of the human response. We had infiltrated them. During the panic-stricken retreat of the First Fleet, a handful of human agents, the best of our new intelligence corps, trained in weeks to understand the subtle social cues and protocols of the Zari, had been smuggled onto damaged Zari vessels and into their prisoner-of-war convoys. They were the saboteurs in their ranks. Quiet, methodical, and invisible until the precise moment of maximum impact. They used the Zari's own technology against them. A single, perfectly timed cascading failure in the Retribution's IFF, identify friend or foe, system. The Zari, programmed for absolute obedience to their network, suddenly saw their allies as the enemy. The battle lasted less than an hour. A perfect, self-inflicted slaughter. The Second Fleet didn't retreat. It ceased to exist. And when the galaxy, finally paying attention, looked for answers, they found only one thing in the smoking ruin of the Kepler Gap. A single, ruined Zari destroyer, drifting in the void. Its hull had been expertly breached, its crew compartment depressurized. And carved into its hull, in crisp, deep human letters, illuminated by the starlight, "We remember." From that day, the galaxy changed. This was no longer a war. It was an execution. The Zari had given us cause, and we had accepted it. The hybrids, now a full-fledged, rapidly expanding fleet, did not return to Earth. They followed the shattered remnants of the Zari fleets, hunting the survivors back to their homes. Zari colonies vanished overnight, not with a planetary explosion, which would be too loud, too visible, but with a chilling, sudden silence. Outposts fell silent. Entire garrisons gone. Sensor logs showed nothing but a few hours of localized magnetic disturbance, followed by the immediate shutdown of all life support and communications. We did not conquer territory. We did not establish new trade routes. We hunted. The Zari Empire, the arrogant, thousand-year superpower, was dissolving not by massive invasion, but by a relentless, silent campaign of surgical terror. Finally, 3 cycles after the invasion of Earth, the High Chancellor Zayala, now hiding in a remote, heavily shielded bunker beneath a gas giant's moon, sent his plea to the human diplomatic corps, which, for the first time, was answered immediately and with no preamble. "What do you want?" The message, transmitted on an ancient, unsecured emergency frequency, simply read. The answer came in a single, unadorned word: justice. And Zari Prime, the heart of a thousand-year empire, the planet whose light had ruled this sector of the galaxy, went dark. There were no survivors. No distress calls. No empire left to rebuild. Nothing but a dead world, its orbital defenses perfectly inert, its colossal planetary energy grid shut down. Only a single, colossal warning, etched by a series of precisely targeted orbital strikes into the planet's primary northern continent, visible from space: "Do not wake the gods." The galaxy never celebrated the Zari's fall. There were no victory speeches, no claims of conquest. The silence of Zari Prime was too loud, too unsettling. Because everyone understood. Humanity hadn't fought a war. We had given a warning. And it was this: we are not prey. We never were. We are hunters. And if you come for us, we will end you.